It's nice to have you here today.
Thanks, Jody.
Yes.
It's good to be here. Thanks for asking me.
You are in the quote-unquote retirement mode for a very short time.
Just barely. I mean, I'm still getting all of my papers and files from teaching for the last, 40 years or so.
40 years, yes.
Kind of cleaned or turned into electronic files.
Did you leave all your books behind?
Jody, I got rid of a lot. Now, some of them went over to St. Catherine of Siena Library, so I know I can get at them if I need to. And some went to Siena Heights Library. So I only brought maybe 4 boxes of books out of maybe 6 boxes out of, and I think I sent 16 to Catherine of Siena. We sent some to the Philippines.
Oh, how beautiful.
So,
yeah, 40 years, congratulations.
Yeah, thank
yes. You. And this, from you just retiring from Siena Heights, yes.
Yeah.
They probably will never be able to find a replacement.
They have somebody. No, I stayed until they did, you know.
Oh, God bless you.
I wanted to make sure the position was filled. Yeah.
Well, I'd first of all, like to take the opportunity, Sister Pat Walter, our former sister Paul Jordan, correct?
Yes.
I haven't heard that in a long time, have you?
Yes, that was way before feminist consciousness. Yeah. Paul Jordan Walter.
Yes. And we'll maybe get to that name. But I want to thank you for your years of service to the congregation as prioress of the congregation. And that was Bush the president at that time, so people kind of get the idea.
Jeez.
Bush or Clinton,
92 to 98, so I'm not sure.
Yes.
Clinton, I think, was probably part of that time at least.
But there were no conflicts going on like there are today, correct?
There were always justice issues, but I can't remember where we were with the wars.
Yeah, I don't remember anything going on at that time. But Pat, who were the lovely women that were elected to serve with you?
Oh, I always say the congregation was so smart. Pat Seaman was the vicaress. And then Chris Matthews, Ann Guinan, and Molly Nicholson. So they just had a wealth of experience and gifts that I didn't have. So it was really a wonderful time of collaboration with them.
And you reflected one another's and shared your gifts with one another's very easily, didn't you?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
You know, that's it. You know, people talk about collaboration and the sharing of gifts. And I think that was the experience where I really recognized, yes, these are my gifts, and these are the others, and these are gifts I don't have. I can remember trying to figure out what to do about something and going into Chris and saying, well, here's the idea, what's the first step? You know, or Pat saying to me, you know, okay, so maybe that's not perfect, but it's going to work. Oh, yeah, so it's like we kept each other kind of sane and kept the mission moving.
Yes. Was there anything anything difficult that you as a group had to do during those times as far as the congregation's concerned?
Well, one of the things that it's humorous in retrospect is we had Dominican High School in the inner city in the city of Detroit, and we kept that open even though the enrollment was very small. They'd opened an intermediate school to try and build the enrollment. But we thought that really went with the vision statements of women and the poor and Dominican and racism. You know, I mean, that Dominican High was a place where we really embodied and addressed those visions or directions. But when the principal came to us in the spring and said, there are only 2 students registered for high school for next year. Ann Guinan pointed out that it would be cheaper if we got tutors.
What a state of affairs.
So we decided to let the faculty know and close the school, and we wanted to do it early so that they could get jobs and the students could get into schools other places. Well, the parents were not happy. The Archbishop or Cardinal was in Poland at the time, and Cardinal Maida, and he came back and had a meeting with Chris and myself and reminded us that this was a ministry in the Archdiocese and we should have had his permission, which he was absolutely correct about. But Chris said, you know, I've been coming to you every year and telling you how much the congregation subsidized Dominican High, and surely you know that's not sustainable. But to his credit, he was really committed to education. So he really committed funds. He let his name be used, and so we, about a week or so, 10 days after we closed the school, we reopened it.
Oh my.
So that's probably one of the more notable things.
Was it sustainable then for
It
years
was
after?
for several years.
Yeah.
Terry Ann DeYonker really did a superb job, and just even handling the parents and trying to get them involved. But I think because, you know, if we were to do it over again, I think what I would do would be try to work with groups in neighborhoods and organizing, because I think people were afraid to send their daughters or granddaughters into that neighborhood. So I think the only way we could have sustained it perhaps would be if we really did some kind of neighborhood change.
Education. Yeah.
Although there's we sold it to some school academy, and I think that's doing well. So
Well, that's encouraging because that land itself has been blessed by all that has happened there with the Adrian Dominicans. Pat, during your years from 92 to 98, you had many trips to Rome, I presume. Was the International Dominican Sisters group formed by that time?
no, actually, I had the privilege of being in the first group. Sister from England called together a group of the English-speaking Dominican prioresses.
You among them.
Right. To see if we could do this, because part of it is, you know, the men had this international coordination, and if they wanted to collaborate with all the Dominican women, there was no vehicle for that. And besides that, we didn't even know how many Dominican groups there were. I mean, so part of it was our own, a big part of it was our own internal desire to connect with one another and be resources and see how we could intensify the mission. So we went over to Rome. That's where I first met Zenaida, and you know, even some of the United States prioresses, Australia, Africa, and we got this started. And then I don't know if it was the next year or 2 years from that, then we invited and opened it up to everybody. And of course, you know, some people were suspicious because is this the Americans trying to do something? We don't want to, you know, get involved because our countries, you know, I mean, that could be precarious for some of us in our countries. But it's really grown. Margaret Ormond was elected the coordinator for it and just did a magnificent job. So yeah, that was one of the great privileges.
Wasn't our Iraqi friend, Sister Marie Therese,
Yes,
Hannah,
right.
part of that
yes,
too?
That's where I first met her.
Yes. Yeah. Pat, from whence do you hail?
Chicago, North Side.
Well, of course.
Yeah, you can still hear the accent.
And
Yeah.
a Rosary graduate.
Regina.
Regina.
Yeah.
I meant Regina, not Aquinas.
No.
The other side of town.
No. No, you know, and I was in the...
Well, how did you get to Regina?
Oh, my dad lived right across the street from St. Columbanus, and was a Prairie, 72nd and Prairie. And I was all set to go to St. Patrick's, which was a mercy school. All my friends were going there. It was a bus ride, you know, I could just take public transportation. And my dad heard that the Adrians were opening up a high school in Wilmette. And he said, well, that's where you're going. He said, the Adrians are the best educators in Chicago.
He knew that because he lived across the street at one point.
Right,
in
well,
his
and
life.
had gone to Columbanus.
Oh.
You know, St. Columbanus.
Well, God bless him.
So when we would-
we have to beatify or sainthood for your father.
I was not happy, you know. This was before the days of students choosing their own school, because we walked on wooden planks across the mud to go meet, I don't know who it was, Sister Kevin, I think.
Heaven.
After whom my youngest brother is named. And so we were the first four-year class there. And they brought in excellent teachers, some of them from Aquinas, and they kept saying how we just didn't have the same school spirit Aquinas did as freshmen.
Didn't know what that meant.
Really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just had great teachers there. It was really 4 years. It was hard because I had to walk a mile to the bus stop, and then it was a school bus, which took an hour to get there. So it was hard because of after-school activities. You know, I couldn't really stay.
Are you the oldest of the siblings?
I am, oldest of 11. So I say I raised my family and then entered.
Well, how was your family about entering when you?
My parents, I think, were really delighted. You know, they're very fervent Catholics, very engaged in the church. And I think they always wanted a priest and a sister. My brothers disappointed them. You know, and my mother, I remember saying to me when I was young, she says, well, when you grow up and become Mother Abbess.
Okay.
So when renewal came along, you know, and Vatican II said, you know, it's the call of all to holiness.
Yes.
You know, I had entered because part of it was I thought, this is a more perfect way of serving God. Well, that just raised all kinds of questions for me. And I thought, well, so I could, you know, be holy and be married. New idea. And I thought, well, is this my mother's vocation or mine? You know, so anyhow, I wound up leaving the congregation. I was in temporary vows, and I was out for 5 years. But you know, it was kind of, Carol Johannes talks about a vocation as like kind of a clam on your toe. You can't get rid of it if it's there, you know. And so I did a retreat, and it became clear to me that what was most important in my life was prayer, study, and teaching. And the way I could do that best was as a member of a community. So I wrote to Sister Rosemary Ferguson and asked if I could come back, and she was really welcoming me.
Were you a senior at Regina at this time? Or had you graduated?
The first time I entered, I had gone a year to St. Teresa's in Winona because I had thought about entering, and I looked at the Franciscans and I thought, well, I like the Dominicans better, but maybe it's just because I had them in high school and I had the Franciscans in grade school.
But didn't you end up teaching at Regina before you re-entered?
Yes, the first year I left, I was a proofreader at a law publishing firm, Topical Law Digest, which was really boring. I think we did the Nixon revision of the tax code. So that was just, you know.
So exciting.
You know, and I chose it because I'd been teaching, and I thought, well, it would be nice to have a 9-to-5 job so that I can have weekends and nights to myself. But it was so deadly that I'd just come home and try to recuperate from the boredom. So then Sister Rita Cecile, who had really been one of my great teachers at Regina, called me and asked me if I'd like to teach there. And I was really touched because I left in 71, so that was kind of early in the leaving. And that she would reach out to me or would not be angry or upset and would want me there with them it meant so much to me. So I was the chair of the Religious Studies Department, and the great thing about it was I had my 3 youngest sisters all went to Regina. I mean, all 5 girls went, but my sister Rita was only 5 years younger than I, so she was graduated, etc. I lived with her actually for a year or 2 until she got married. So I drove them to school until Maggie, the oldest of those 3, was old enough to drive. So it was a gift of getting to know the youngest members of my family, because they were probably 5, 4, 3 when I entered. So that was a great gift.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Rosemary said, come, and...
Yes.
Yes.
And I did.
And did you have to go through a rigid training
Again?
or retraining?
Well, they were very clear, you know, that renewal had happened and things were changed, which I knew because I taught
And
with the
part of
sisters
it,
at Regina,
right.
you know. So I lived at the formation house we had across the street with somebody else who had left and come back, Martha Isabel, and then Barb Wall had been in another community and she had left, and then she entered. She taught philosophy at Siena while I was teaching. Martha and I were teaching religious studies. And then Carol Jean McDonald was kind of like the house mother. And Teresa Dish came second semester. She was finishing up her degree, and then she was going to be the formation director. So it was
What a
really
nice
that
group.
Yeah, oh, it was great. So it was really meeting with Catherine Deutsch once a month, just kind of to kind of process what I was doing and so on. So it was, it was not hard.
Oh, and you knew everyone.
Oh, Jody,
Yes,
that was
yes,
the great
yeah.
grace to come back and all these wonderful women, that lived.
You were in the Good Shepherd crowd, is
I
that
was,
right?
mhm.
Yes, yes.
Patrick Jerome's last 25th crowd, I think we were.
Yeah,
And then Ruth Steiner's first group.
yes. Lucky
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So it was a transition even then,
Yes. Where did you get the desire? How did it get implanted in you, the desire to study theology?
Well, immediately, I was asked to go and study French, to get a doctorate in French, because Sister
my.
Regina Marie Lalande was getting older, and so I think they wanted me at Siena. But I got thinking about that, and I thought, that means I'll probably spend the rest of my life correcting grammar, which also seemed very boring. So, and I'd always had kind of theological questions. I can remember in high school just kind of being in a class pondering this idea of the resurrection of the body, because if our bodies are buried and decayed and the molecules, go into other things, how is this reassembly all going to happen, And, just trying to figure out just a lot of things that didn't make sense to me about the religion. And I can remember in high school, we had to do an outline of Jesus' life from the 4 Gospels. Well, I just had the hardest time. And then when I studied Scripture, I realized, it's because John's got 1 year and others have 3 or vice versa. So the accounts aren't the same. But so, it was that kind of thing that...
What about sanctifying grace?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't you deal with that?
Well, yeah, and I was cleaning out my notes. I found a paper I wrote when I was a freshman at St. Teresa's. We had Dominicans there, about the controversy between the Jesuits and Dominicans on sanctifying grace. And
God bless you.
I wrote that at 18, it was... I don't think I could explain it to you today. But... So, and, Vatican II was there, and so things were changing, and so how do you know what's right and what's true? So anyhow, I asked if I could study theology instead. So I got permission, and actually I was asked to go to CTU, so I wrote to them, and they said, well, we do have a MA PhD degree, but unfortunately we can't take women right now.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So, but actually it was great because I wound up at Aquinas Institute, the Dominican Men's Place in Dubuque. Mm-hmm. So that was wonderful to get to know the men.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Who were some of the professors you had there?
Kevin O'Rourke and Cletus Wessels, Tom O'Mara.
Oh, my.
Chris Kiesling. Jerome Murphy O'Connor came from the École Biblique to teach class in Matthew. So they were just some really fine people.
When you look back at all the fortunate studies you were allowed or came your way, what do you find, what would you say was the most grounding of the courses you took?
Well, in doctoral work, I think I went to Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, mm-hmm. and I had Michael Buckley, Jesuit, who's just a genius, for a class on Rahner. And, it really was Aquinas for the modern day in some ways, it was built on that. So the whole idea that who we are is really embodied spirits open and created for the reception of the divine. That God created us so that God could communicate God's self to us. That's just a profound insight, I think. That we've learned as Dominicans, grace builds on nature. Mm-hmm. But to look at that nature as not something that's closed but open,
And changing?
And that's the spirit is, yes, right, exactly. Natural law is not this closed kind of thing. We're open, we're evolving, we're able to go beyond where we are now. So that was really, I think, probably one of the more significant classes.
Did your concept of God change dramatically?
Oh, yeah. I went to Aquinas in '69. So Vatican II was just over, and then it was like trying to take that theology with what we had before and saying, what stays, what goes? And that really was one of my questions, like, how do you know what's true? How do you, is there anything that's unchanging? Is it all up for grabs? How do you make decisions about it? So it was those kinds of questions that really were throwing me, I think, after years of kind of, here's what we believe, and being very clear about that. So I really went through a crisis of faith, and basically I just kept looking at my professors, and we had community liturgy every day, and I kept going, okay, they keep going to liturgy, and they're still believers, even though they have this different understanding. So if they could do that, I can do that, without losing the faith. It was more like images changed, or it was a paradigm shift, but there's still God world realities, but it's just understood in a very different way. And I took process theology, and when I was in doctoral work, I studied Whitehead, who was really a philosopher built on quantum, the work of Einstein and so on. So relativity, relationship, change, those were all kinds of things that intrigued me, and that's part of the reason I went out to Berkeley, because I really wanted to understand that view better. So I did comps on Teilhard and on Whitehead, and just the whole thing about who is God in a processive, evolving, dynamic universe, and what does God's will mean, and how do we talk about that, and what does God know if the world is new
Evolving,
each day,
yes.
and what does Creator mean in that kind of a situation?
Well, at this point in your life, you are probably not able to count the number of students you have had through the years. But imagine sharing that thought, that gift, those questions with young men and women especially. Where exactly did you spend the majority of your time teaching?
Actually, most of my time really has been spent, I taught at the seminary in Cleveland for 6 years. And then I taught at Aquinas for, 13, I think. And then I had a stint for a semester at the Angelicum in Rome, which was an experience. But so it was really working with people interested in ministry, or already in it, but wanting credentials, which was just such a great gift to me. I mean, I loved working with adults, and in retrospect, that experience I had in my 20s of kind of having to rethink or reimagine kind of everything I'd received, to say, how does this make sense in a new cosmology, post-Vatican II, et cetera, was a gift that I could give to students, and even teaching at Siena, to say to students, don't be scared. This seems threatening, it seems strange, you're wondering where things are going, but what you're doing is losing images. It's your imagination of what we can't really see, touch, and taste. So we have to use imagination. Well,
And ask the questions, too.
That's right.
Yes.
But faith is in what we can't see. And so how theology is just supposed to be faith, seeking understanding, St. Anselm says. So how do we understand that belief in a God we can't see in ourselves and the world in relation to that in a way that makes sense as adults in this world? And that is just, that has been a gift of a lifetime.
Amen. Yes. Do you wake up every morning now saying, now, who am I going to teach today?
I don't, Jody.
Or what am I going to teach?
No, I don't.
What a relief that must be, thinking about the next class and then the next class and papers, I presume.
Papers. Yes, the people I live with said it's so nice to see you sitting in the living room not correcting papers. And with 18-year-olds especially, there's so many that are unchurched. And, one religious studies class is required at Siena. So to be teaching, an intro class to students that, they must have questions, but they haven't
Even thought of them.
Thought of them, yeah. Or they don't know how to articulate them. So that after teaching adults who were eager and who were believers, it's been a real stretch to
Tough.
try to teach. I thought I don't think that my first calling is as an evangelist, but it's like, so how to connect with the students
And light the light.
exactly.
Yes.
Or to get them thinking about things, It's like, instead of just, well, here's the answer, it's like, well, let's think about that.
Let's look it up on
Exactly,
Google.
yes, yeah. I mean, everything can be just put in this little screen, and there you are, that's the world. Doesn't work for
They
theology.
don't know what they're missing. Exactly. So do you, once the papers are gone through, do you have a desire for travel or?
Not really. I leave next Monday for 2 months at a hermitage in Kentucky at the Sisters of Loretta. And so just to take some contemplative time and space.
Have you ever had that length of time?
I've had sabbaticals. That's
Yeah.
the great thing about a teaching job,
Yeah.
And 1 year in my sabbatical, actually, I went away to write. So I was by myself probably for a couple of months there. A friend loaned me their place on the Pacific Ocean. So I was there from January through March, I guess.
But this is a different focus.
Right. It really is a question of what's next. I have some things I've taught that I'd like to write about and kind of just put completion on it. But the thing that is really kind of catching my interest now is if we're preachers and we preach out of our experience, and if we are a congregation of wisdom women, we have a lot of experience. How do we reflect on our experience, and what can we offer to our culture, which is also aging? Or, what do we know about the spirituality of aging, of death, of accompaniment, of companionship through life? One of the students had an internship over here, and he's not a believer, but he loves religious studies and psychology, and he worked with the sisters in the memory loss unit. And he said to me, this was a profound experience in the fall. He said,
With our sisters
with
here,
our
Mary?
sisters here,
Mary.
he just was doing it as an internship because his question was, is there more to what it means to be human than an instrumental view, which some psychologists would offer, a functional view of what it means to be human. And he said he's never experienced such unconditional love and acceptance. And he said he's never experienced people talking so openly about aging and death. And, that one sister said, I hope you come to my funeral.
Oh.
And he said, and after he finished his internship, he'd come every Wednesday because he said, these are my friends and they look forward to seeing me, So there's something there which I think we have to offer to people. And that might be the next kind of area I'm thinking about and reflecting on. So I've got, I think 6 books on dying, spirituality of aging, et cetera, that are going in the car with me.
Oh, my. What a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Well, Pat, thank you for this time, and blessings on the next 2 months.
Thank you, Jody.
And not only your openness, but for what the rest of the journey might be. But it's already in you. It just is becoming aware of that, wouldn't you say? Yes.
Yeah.
And please take time to applaud yourself for what you have given this world of ours.
Thank you, Jody.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the blessing.